Hi, everybody. I'm Glenn Kennedy. This is my co-host Charles Mautz.
Glad to be here today.
Welcome back to Barn Talk. How you doing this morning, Charles?
It's a hot one, isn't it,
It-
out there?
it is hot,
It
yeah.
really is. I'll tell you this. So
So we're still in the 40s, and the war starts to come to an end. And I was going to ask you. So the guy who dubbed the name West Covina, his name was Matthews, L.C. Matthews, L. something Matthews. I don't know what his first name was. But he was a local historian
mhm.
who ran the Covina Argus.
Yes, that's right.
So, because we were called Pumpkin Center and Walnut Center. We had the walnut trees. But Charles, tell us about the pumpkins.
Oh, the pumpkins are interesting. They would raise the pumpkins between the walnut trees, and they'd take about a 10-foot, 20-foot slip right between the middle of them because, see, some of our walnut trees weren't fully developed yet. And even if they were, you had to cut the little ends off or the tree would be, limbs would break. And you could raise a nice pumpkin crop. And you could pick that crop and store it in the barn in straw. And we raised very nice pumpkins. You could raise mushmelons. You could raise corn. Not corn was a little bit etchy, but that'd have to be corn for canning. Or you could put beans in, and it worked out real well. Melons, we didn't get enough heat, and watermelons the same way, but nothing went to waste, did it?
No,
Nothing.
not at all.
Yeah. And the pumpkins we'd thin out a little bit, and you'd get a longer stem on them, and people like a long stem. And there was enough labor and enough time to turn them, and it was nice and cool below the leaves, and you wouldn't get that burnt spot on the pumpkins.
Okay.
And they were really highly prized in Los Angeles.
So if we were called Pumpkin Center, then we raised a lot of pumpkins.
We raised a lot of pumpkins.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yes. And
Yeah, I guess they used every square inch of the field, didn't they?
they sure did. Just example, they'd plant a little corn at the end for themselves or
Sure.
some melons. They weren't markable that well, but they were good enough for us. So made
Yeah.
a big difference.
Yeah, interesting. So, as Mr. Matthews dies, that's how the Tribune got started.
That's correct. Yes.
Well, I want to, but I have to ask you this question. So, during the war, where was the hospitality house at?
Oh, that was on College Street right
Okay.
there. Yes, and the Covina and West Covina got together. And
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And
Well, because we have a picture of the hospitality house, and you see all the soldiers from World War II,
mhm.
and I don't recognize the house. That's why. And I've been wanting to ask you, and I keep forgetting to ask you.
It was a nice home on College Street.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
that answers that. Okay.
College Street had homes on both ends of Citrus, but as it was developed, the hospital took some of them for doctor's office. But the other end, by the 31 Flavors and the Baptist Church, there's some nice homes in there.
Absolutely.
Beautiful homes.
Yeah. Okay. So Mr. Matthews dies.
Mhm.
So he ran the Covina Argus, and so out of that, the Tribune forms.
That's correct. Yes.
And I know A.Q. Miller was the first publisher,
Mhm.
but was he the owner?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know that at some point, I don't know if it was from the beginning, but at some point, Joe Hurst and Al Potter
Mhm.
and Pete Sunfield took over.
That's correct.
And,
And they all bought interest as silent partners, I believe.
and I think the mayor at the time was Clyde Batchelder.
That's correct.
And from what Joe had told me, that he had bought in as a silent partner,
Mhm.
and then it went south
Yeah. Mhm.
between those two because
Sure.
after Batchelder was mayor, Joe Hurst, I think the next year after became mayor and was mayor for like 5 or 6 years too.
Sure.
So I know there was a little rift between how I took it, but I know Mr. Batchelder, he had the biggest house in West Covina.
Yeah, it was huge.
He had a huge house.
Yes.
It was his property was where the Eastland Shopping Center is
That's
today.
correct. Yes.
In between Citrus and Barranca, it was 50 acres.
Mhm.
He had like a 25 room house.
Yes.
He had the racetrack, a quarter mile racetrack,
Mm-hmm.
and it was called Vasquero
Yes.
Vasquero track, and because I think that's what his home was called, something Vasquero Ranch. That's what it was. And he also had the softball field, and the baseball field, and he had a football field, and they had picnic. It had a picnic area, so when the community had an event, they all went to his house.
That's correct.
So he like opened it up for the community, and that's where everybody went to have a good time. It's just like if you wanted to go swimming, you came to Joe Hurst's ranch because he had a gigantic swimming pool. And then, like Mrs. Renicky said, if you had nobody to play with, you went over to the Maxon's house because they had 13 kids.
Yeah, roller skating down the staircase,
Roller
having a
skating
great
down.
time. Yeah, yeah, it was true. Yes, it was.
But I was going to ask you, so that I know he purchased that property in the late 20s or early 30s, and was it still Covina? Because that area was Covina, and I know it got annexed into West Covina. Do you know what year it was?
No, I don't know the exact year. But I'd say
Because it had to be before he was on the city council, because you can't be on the city council and live in Covina. You go to jail for that. So that's against the law.
Well, I don't know. These guys seem to do what they want. But, I know there was a little talk about that. But also he owned a little chunk up here off Sunset where he had horses too.
Yes. Right. He lived next door to Mrs. Renicky.
That's correct.
And now her father was Mr. Charlie Kranz was her father.
Yes.
And they had a property next to that.
Yeah, it was a horse ranch, and it had white fences, wooden fence around. It was quite attractive at that time, and I guess he stored his horses there, or did something with them. Yeah, Mr. Batchelder was an interesting individual.
Yeah, well, it's how it was back then. I guess it might have been control for power.
Yeah.
And that's how it was.
How it was, yeah. Well, I ran into him going up the Grapevine over here. I was with Joe Hurst, and we stopped at Borden there, and we started up the hill, and there was not an old truck, but a truck with a lot of old stuff on it, and it was having a tough time making the hill.
Yeah.
And we got up next to it, and Joe said, I think he'll make it over the hill, but he's got a real surprise going down the hill, and it was Mr. Batchelder. And he bought a ranch out there, Visaya Beyond in Orange Grove, and he was taking all his equipment out. So that's how he was doing that. But I thought that was interesting. He took, and he was still in farming, and that's interesting. He never gave that up. That's the last I heard of him. But that was interesting. Yeah, in West Covina you could do, drift around.
Yeah, I know that you could. Back in the day, the city council would go to Coffee Dan's, and they do other business, but there was no sense of having a council meeting.
That's right.
I mean, they already did it, and then they just did it, for the public, but all the decisions were already made. And now, if you did that, you'd all go to jail because that's called the Brown Act.
Yeah, the Brown Act.
Yeah.
And if they didn't want you into the meeting, they just locked you out.
Okay, yeah. The old famous story was that they were having a council meeting at Coffee Dan's, and George Iase, as the city manager, came, and they locked the door on him and turned the sign on and said we're closed at 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah. And the waitress said, you can't do that. And somebody said they own it.
I love that story.
I do too. But, that's what.
Well, and I was going to ask you, Charles, before I forget. So last week we were talking about the speed trap.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, there was a reason why people didn't go down Valley Boulevard. Why don't you explain that to us?
Yes. Valley Boulevard was an old road, and they concreted it in. That was and they made it 3 lanes. That they had a passing lane in the middle.
So the passing, in case you didn't know, back then, you had one lane coming, one lane going, and you could pass in the middle, which was called the suicide lane.
It was.
And so if somebody going northbound or southbound, they decided to get in the passing lane at the same time, they were instantly killed. They were head on at 75 miles an hour. You have no chance for survival.
You were done.
You were done.
When you left El Monte and you went to Pueneon Valley, there was nothing hardly. Just a few. And then when you left Puente and went to Pomona, there was nothing. The only thing there was there's a tavern at Grand and Valley, and that was it. And so if you were driving and had an accident or a flat tire or something, you were alone. To give you an idea how vacant that was, with all the farming on both sides, when the trains went through San Bernardino heading into Los Angeles, mostly freight trains, they were, you know the saying high ball, that's when the ball is clear of the top. That means the train can go as fast as it wants to go. So who's ever running the tracks would raise that ball up and down. When it left San Bernardino, it was at half ball, halfway up. So, but when it got to Pomona, the ball was what they call a high ball. It was clear of the top. And that meant that conductor could go as fast as he wanted, right to Rosemead. Rosemead, it dropped down to a half. So basically, you could see that the train wasn't worried about anything. And they said it was quite a sight, but I never, of course, never saw it. But that train was doing, it was, they were steam driven in those days. And it must have been quite a thing when it was going full speed.
So did the kids race the train?
I heard they raced the train. When you cut around Puente, between Puente and El Monte, the kids would race the train. And when you got to Sunset, Orange, or California, you could dodge in front of it. Well, if they didn't make it, that'd be the last we'd hear of them. They didn't graduate with their class.
But so that's why Haddock's Tone is on Valley Boulevard.
Yeah, that was. But anyway, Valley was a concrete 3-lane highway, dark as can be. So they decided to dig ditches, deep ditches next to it on both sides to drain the water because it was kind of rotting the concrete and raising it. And that worked out pretty good, but they still needed something. You could go off, have an accident, slide off, and get in there and drown because it was a real ditch. And that area has a fog, like a Tule fog in the San Joaquin, and it was always kind of fogged in. So I don't know why they decided on pepper trees, but they thought if they lined it with pepper trees, people wouldn't go down into this ditch, but they slid off. But the pepper trees had oil on them, little oil on each leaf.
Do they have berries or just a leaf?
It's a leaf, I believe. Okay. Maybe those did have berries. They were the older things. Maybe they had both. Yeah. So if you were on that road and there was a nice fog, you might just slide off for no reason at all. And it was a death trap. And, and if you did have an accident, there was nobody to help you. There was absolutely nobody out there.
It was dark.
Dark.
It was quiet. It was eerie, and nobody was around. You were on your own.
And there was just cattle on both and sheep. That was quite a sheep area. And it was unfenced, too. But they didn't really cross over too much. And, there was a slight rumor that that's how, during Prohibition, some of the spirits, the alcohol, came into Los Angeles.
Yeah, I was told that Valley Boulevard was called the Rum Route.
Rum Route, that's right. And a lot of that was raised, the grains and the corn was raised out in Chino, Puente, and
I heard it was Mariloma. Mariloma and Fontana.
Yeah.
Where the wheat fields were at, and then was it Pomona or Chino where the cornfields were at?
The cornfields at the end of 5th Street in town. Basically.
So somewhere in that area there was a distillery.
There had to
distillery,
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and that's where it was coming in from. That's what the rumors are, and I think they're true.
Well, I heard that too.
Yeah.
Everybody who lived around here knew that.
Yeah. You remember during the Second War they burnt the fields?
They burnt the fields,
yeah?
Absolutely.
I thought the Japanese were parachuting in there. Maybe they wanted some of that. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why you really didn't go down a Valley Boulevard at night, and you kind of stayed away from it in the daytime, especially early in the morning and late in the evening. And it was a very dangerous road. And so...
Thank you, Charles. That was quite interesting. So with that, we'll call it a day.
Oh, sure.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. You have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.